Nearly 3 decades ago, an entire fourth-grade class disappeared during what should have been an ordinary school field trip, vanishing completely and leaving behind devastated families searching for answers. Initial suspicions fell on Leonard Allen, the teacher supervising the excursion. As one of the rare African-American educators at Fairmont Elementary, Mr. Allen had quietly weathered years of underlying prejudice in their tight-knit Southern community. When catastrophe struck, hushed conversations became outright allegations. Some community members believed he had planned the children's disappearance as retaliation for the discrimination he'd endured. Others maintained his innocence, arguing he was merely a convenient target amid grief, terror, and ingrained prejudices. With no physical evidence and virtually no leads to pursue, investigators eventually abandoned the case. Yet throughout these many years, one determined mother refused to surrender hope, holding on to the slim possibility that her child might somehow still be alive. Then, one afternoon, while examining an aged photograph, she spotted a critical detail, a detail that would transform everything and expose a reality more devastating than anyone had ever conceived. Ellen Murphy awakened on October 14, 2015, carrying the familiar weight of grief that had settled deep in her bones. Beyond her bedroom window, Charleston, South Carolina's sky hung heavy with dense gray clouds, the type that brought both rain and unwanted memories. She had prepared herself for this anniversary. Still, the pain cut deeper than words could capture. 27 years had passed since her son Daniel disappeared alongside his classmates during what should have been a simple educational trip to Magnolia Plantation and Gardens. Ellen slowly moved her legs over the bed's edge, each motion deliberate and careful, every breath serving as proof she had endured the impossible. Yet enduring wasn't the same as truly living. She stood and walked to her dresser, where a small, weathered photograph was tucked into the mirror's frame. Daniel's school picture, taken just 14 days before he vanished. His crooked grin, the freckles dotting his nose, the pride with which he wore his school uniform, all of it carved permanently into her heart. She brought the photo to her lips, murmuring, "Good morning, sweetheart," before carefully returning it to its place. After getting dressed, Ellen glanced at her phone. A single message waited on the screen from her dearest friend, Maggie Lewis, another mother who had lost her daughter Amanda on that same terrible day. "Thinking of you today. Stop by if you'd like. I've got coffee brewing." Ellen managed a sad smile. Maggie had been her anchor through the years, one of the few who truly understood the persistent ache that came from questions left unanswered. She quickly replied, "Heading over now," before making her way to the kitchen. Gathering a container of cinnamon cookies and a box of Earl Grey tea, Ellen pulled on her jacket. Even after decades of friendship, arriving at Maggie's empty-handed felt wrong. It went against everything proper, everything Southern. As she stepped outside, the crisp October air struck her face, thick with the scent of nearby marshlands. The James Island streets remained quiet, the houses seemingly unchanged, like museum pieces frozen in time while everything within them had fallen apart. The 10-minute walk to Maggie's felt different today. Each step seemed like a slow march toward morning. Memories called to Ellen from every direction. Daniel's red bicycle still propped against their neighbor's fence, the oak tree where local children had once hung tire swings. By the time she reached Maggie's front door, Ellen's heart felt like lead in her chest. Before she could even raise her hand to knock, the door opened. Maggie stood there holding a coffee mug, her free arm extended in wordless invitation for comfort. "Come on in, honey," she said, her voice rough with emotion and time. Inside, the comforting aroma of vanilla candles and aged books embraced Ellen like a warm hug. She handed over the cookies and tea before settling into the familiar worn sofa. Maggie vanished into the kitchen, returning with 2 steaming cups. They sat together quietly for several minutes, sipping their drinks, allowing the warmth to chase away the chill that grief had left behind. "How are you managing?" Maggie finally asked, her tone gentle. Ellen shrugged. "Like every year. Some days I believe I've moved past it. Then this date arrives and everything comes flooding back." Maggie nodded knowingly. Some wounds never truly heal. As they talked, Ellen's thoughts wandered back to those horrific early weeks following the disappearance. How swiftly the community's sorrow had transformed into rage. Some neighbors searched for explanations in tragically misguided places. Mr. Allen, patient, committed, and beloved by his students, became a target of suspicion. The reality that he was black in a town still haunted by historical biases only intensified the accusations. Some whispered that he had exploited the field, tripped to seek revenge against a society that had pushed him to the margins. Others declared the notion ridiculous, refusing to believe such a gentle spirit could harm the children he had dedicated his career to teaching. The truth had remained hidden, tangled in loss, guilt, and the ugliness that emerged when fear took control. Ellen had never known what to think, only that Daniel and Amanda and all the rest, they were gone, and no one had ever faced consequences. After some time, Maggie rose and searched through a drawer beneath the coffee table. She retrieved a thick, dusty photo album and set it between them. "I was wondering," Maggie said cautiously, "maybe looking through some old memories might be helpful, or at least not quite as painful today." Ellen paused, then gave a slight nod. "Perhaps it's time." They turned through the album gradually. Images of birthday celebrations, school field days, lazy summer evenings by the river. Joy and light captured forever in glossy rectangles. Then Ellen's hand stopped moving. It was a picture she couldn't recall seeing before. A snapshot of the students arranged in front of the school bus that October morning. The children beamed widely, unaware of what lay ahead. And standing beside them, partially visible in the bus window's reflection, was a figure Ellen didn't immediately recognize. Not Mr. Allen, their teacher, but another adult. A woman with angular features and blonde hair secured in a tight bun. "Who is that?" Ellen whispered, her finger shaking as she pointed to the reflection. Maggie leaned in, squinting. "That looks like Claire Redford. Wasn't she the assistant principal?" Ellen's stomach dropped. She left town right after it happened, resigned from her position, said she needed a new beginning. They shared a meaningful look, both remembering how abrupt and unusual that resignation had seemed, but how nobody had cared enough to investigate further. Grief had consumed their instincts back then. Ellen stood quickly, still gripping the photograph. "I need to locate her," she declared, her voice steadier than it had been in years. Maggie reached out, worry flickering across her face. "Ellen, you don't need to go stirring up old pain." But Ellen shook her head. Maybe that pain never really went away. As she stepped back into the gray afternoon, Ellen felt something awakening inside her, something fierce and determined. For the first time in 27 years, she wasn't simply mourning. She was hunting, and this time she wouldn't quit until she discovered the truth. That evening, Ellen sat at her kitchen table with the old photograph spread before her. Claire. Redford's faint reflection practically searing into her consciousness. She barely touched her dinner, her mind racing. If Claire had been present that morning, if she had joined the class on that bus, why hadn't anyone known? Why had she concealed the truth? Ellen opened her laptop, its screen's glow the room's only illumination, and began investigating. It took longer than she'd hoped, but persistence had become her nature. Searching through online public records, she traced a Claire Benson, formerly Redford, now residing in Prescott, Arizona, a small community nestled in the high desert where pine trees met arid earth, a location far removed from Charleston's humid marshlands. Her heart pounded painfully as she stared at the address. Was it naive to pursue a shadow? After all these years, could she actually discover answers? She remembered Daniel's smile, the playful sparkle in his eyes that morning he climbed aboard the bus, and realized she had no alternative. She booked a flight for the following morning without hesitation. Charleston's airport was nearly deserted when Ellen arrived just before sunrise, her single carry-on bag slung over her shoulder. She moved through security with the weary resolve of someone who had nothing left to risk. During the flight, she gazed out the window as clouds drifted below them. lost in a whirlwind of memories and half-formed anxieties. Was Claire another victim, or had she played a role? Ellen didn't know, but her instinct suggested this woman possessed a piece of the puzzle everyone else had overlooked. Landing in Phoenix felt like entering an alien world. South Carolina's humid thickness was replaced by dry, scorching heat, the sky a vast, endless blue. She rented a modest gray sedan and began the 2-hour drive north to Prescott, the landscape transforming from cactus-dotted plains to rocky hills and whispering pines. As she drove, doubts began creeping in. She was a 60-year-old woman pursuing a memory 3 decades old. Claire might have relocated again. She could refuse to speak with Ellen. Worse, she might be innocent, and Ellen would only be reopening wounds without purpose. But when the GPS announced her arrival, Ellen found herself parked outside a neat single-story house with a white picket fence and perfectly maintained lawn. It appeared so ordinary it was almost painful. She sat in the car for several minutes, summoning her courage before finally stepping out. Her palms were damp despite the dry air. She walked up the pathway, knocked firmly on the door, and waited. A few moments later, the door opened slightly, and there she was, Claire Redford, aged but unmistakable. Her blonde hair was now streaked with silver, her face marked by time, but her sharp blue eyes remained unchanged. For a brief moment, Claire appeared confused, then guarded. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice tense. Ellen steadied herself. "My name is Ellen Murphy," she said. "My son Daniel was one of the children who vanished in Charleston. You were the assistant principal at Fairmont Elementary." Claire's face visibly paled, her grip tightening on the doorframe. "I'm sorry. I think you've got the wrong person," she said hurriedly. But Ellen caught the fear that flashed through her eyes. She pressed forward. "No, I recognize you. I have a photograph. You were there that morning. You were at the bus. You never told anyone." Claire opened her mouth, then closed it again. For a long moment the two women stared at each other, the silence so thick it felt like it might shatter. Finally, Claire stepped back and opened the door wider. "You'd better come inside." Inside, the house carried the faint scent of lemon and aged books. Family photographs, none featuring children, lined the walls. Ellen sat rigidly on the couch's edge, while Claire busied herself preparing 2 cups of tea, as if courtesy could erase the years of silence between them. After a moment, Claire spoke, her voice thin. "I didn't want to be there that day. I wasn't scheduled to go. Mr. Allen needed another chaperone. I volunteered at the last minute." "Then why lie about it?" Ellen demanded, her voice breaking. Claire looked down at her hands. "Because after it happened, people needed someone to blame. I didn't want them thinking I was involved." "But you were there," Ellen said fiercely. "You were an adult. You could have helped. You could have testified." Claire shook her head, a tear sliding down her cheek. "It wasn't that straightforward. I witnessed things that day. Things I can never forget." Ellen's breath caught. "Tell me." Claire hesitated so long Ellen thought she might refuse. But then, in a trembling voice, she began. "When we arrived at the plantation, everything appeared normal. The children scattered to different exhibits. Mr. Allen was gathering them for a group picture when a van approached near the side gate, an area not open to the public that day. I assumed it was just delivery personnel. I didn't think much of it initially." Ellen leaned forward, her heart racing. Claire's hands shook as she continued. "Then masked men jumped out. They had weapons. They forced us onto the bus. Mr. Allen tried to resist them. He really did. He shouted at me to run. I attempted to, but—" She choked on the words. "They grabbed me too." Ellen's mouth went dry. This wasn't the story she'd been told, not the narrative the town had whispered to itself all these years. What happened next? "They drove us into the woods. They separated the children and loaded them into different vehicles. I was knocked unconscious. When I came to, I was alone on the bus, abandoned. Police found me hours later. I panicked. I lied. I claimed I hadn't gone on the trip at all. Why? Ellen whispered, horrified. Because I was terrified, Claire whispered back, her voice raw. Afraid of the questions, afraid they'd think I had helped. And maybe I was ashamed. I didn't stop them. I couldn't stop them. The room spun around Ellen. She struggled to process it all. Mr. Allen had tried to protect them. He wasn't the villain people had made him out to be. He had been a hero. Did you recognize any of the men? Ellen asked. Claire hesitated. One of them. He wore a jacket. Fairmont Booster Club. He wasn't an outsider, Ellen. He was one of us. The floor seemed to disappear beneath Ellen. A neighbor. A parent. Someone they had trusted. The scale of the betrayal crushed her chest. Why are you telling me this now? Ellen demanded. Claire's face crumpled. Because you deserve the truth. You and all the other parents. I can't carry it anymore. Ellen stared at her for a long moment, then slowly stood. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. You need to come forward. I will, Claire said, tears streaming down her face. I promise. As Ellen stepped back into the harsh Arizona sunlight, the air buzzed around her ears. The world looked the same. Cars passed, children played in yards. But everything had changed. She had pieces of the truth now, real pieces. Enough to reopen the investigation. Enough to honor Daniel, Amanda, and all the others who had never come home. She climbed into the rental car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. Claire's words echoed in her mind. One of us. Someone they had known. Someone still living free. And Ellen Murphy was done waiting. It was time for justice. Ellen drove back to Phoenix under a sky bruised with early evening colors, the clouds turning purple and molten orange against the desert landscape. She hardly noticed the scenery. Her mind was a battlefield of emotions. Relief, anger, sorrow, colliding inside her with the intensity of a summer thunderstorm. She had come to Arizona seeking a ghost and had found the first true pieces of the puzzle instead. Claire's confession gnawed at her mind. A van, masked men, betrayal from within their own community. It was worse than she had imagined. Mr. Allen had been wrongfully accused all those years, condemned without a fair hearing. Ellen felt a burning shame at the memory of how quickly the town's fear had twisted into prejudice. If only they had listened. If only they had looked deeper. But it was too late for regrets. Now she had a responsibility to act. At the Phoenix airport, she sat in a hard plastic chair, clutching her boarding pass so tightly it wrinkled, her nerves buzzing with impatience. She called Maggie, who answered almost immediately. I found her, Ellen said, her voice trembling with exhaustion and determination. What happened? What did she say? Maggie's voice crackled over the line, thick with apprehension. It's worse than we thought, Ellen whispered, leaning forward, hunching over the phone as if the truth might slip away if she didn't hold it tightly. Claire said masked men abducted them, that it wasn't random, it was planned. And it wasn't Mr. Allen. He tried to save them. Maggie was silent for a long beat, then said quietly, My God. I'm coming home, Ellen said. We have work to do. The flight back felt endless. The recycled air, the hum of the engines, the cramped seats, none of it touched Ellen. She was already back in Charleston in her mind, standing in the town square, holding up the truth like a torch. When she finally landed, the night air was thick and humid again, clinging to her skin as she stepped out of the terminal. The familiar scent of the coast, salt, moss, damp earth, filled her lungs. It was a strange comfort. She picked up her car and drove directly to Maggie's house, too wound up to even think about sleep. Maggie was waiting for her on the porch, a cardigan wrapped tightly around her shoulders. They embraced briefly, fiercely, and then went inside where the kitchen light was warm and welcoming. Over cups of strong black coffee, Ellen told her everything. Every word Claire had confessed, every tremor in her voice, every detail she could remember. Maggie listened without interrupting, her eyes growing wider and darker as the story unfolded. So, what do we do? Maggie asked when Ellen finally finished, her voice small. "We go to the police," Ellen said simply. "We make them listen." "You think they'll reopen the case after all these years?" "They have to," Ellen said, "especially if Claire's willing to testify." Maggie nodded slowly, chewing her lip. "We'll need more than just Claire's word, Ellen. After all this time, people forget. People doubt." "I know," Ellen said grimly. "That's why we start gathering everything we can, old witness statements, news reports, anything that points to gaps in the original investigation." Maggie hesitated. "You know some people aren't going to want this stirred up again." "I don't care," Ellen said, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. "They can't bury what happened. They can't bury our children." The next morning, they began. They pulled dusty boxes from attics, old file folders from closets, newspaper clippings yellowed with time. They met at Maggie's kitchen table every day, sorting, cross-referencing, building a fragile bridge back to the truth. Ellen contacted the Charleston County Sheriff's Department and scheduled a meeting with Detective Ray Harmon, a man who had been a rookie back in '88 and now oversaw cold cases. She was determined not to be brushed aside. The day of the meeting, Ellen dressed carefully, choosing a simple navy dress and sensible shoes. She wanted to look serious, credible, immovable. Maggie came with her. The two women a wall of quiet, resolve. Detective Harmon met them in a conference room lined with faded photos of missing persons and aging wanted posters. His hair was thinner, his face rounder than she remembered, but his eyes were sharp. "We appreciate you coming," he said, though Ellen could sense the skepticism lurking behind his professional politeness. "You said you had new information?" "Yes," Ellen said, placing the photograph on the table, her finger pointing to the reflection. "This woman, Claire Redford, was at the scene. She lied in her original statement. I found her. She confessed." Detective Harmon studied the photo, then leaned back in his chair. "Confessed to what exactly?" Ellen repeated Claire's story, keeping her voice even though her heart thudded painfully. She saw Harmon's expression shift as she spoke, from polite dismissal to guarded interest. "Have her contact information?" he asked. "Yes," Ellen said, sliding a piece of paper across the table. Harmon tapped the paper thoughtfully. "You realize reopening a case like this, it won't be easy. It could reopen wounds for a lot of families." "Those wounds never closed," Maggie said quietly. "We deserve to know the truth." Harmon nodded slowly. "I'll reach out to her. We'll have to verify everything, but if it checks out—" He trailed off, then said, "You might have just cracked one of the oldest cold cases in Charleston County." Relief and fear battled inside Ellen. They had taken the first step, but she knew the real battle was just beginning. Over the next week, the town buzzed with rumors. Someone must have seen Ellen and Maggie at the station because whispers spread faster than wildfire. Some were hopeful. At last, after all these years, maybe there would be answers. Others were resentful, accusing them of dragging up old pain for no good reason. One afternoon, as Ellen walked out of the grocery store with a bag of bread and milk, she ran into Martha Simmons, who had lost her grandson Caleb in the disappearance. Martha's face was pinched, her eyes cold. "Why can't you let it lie, Ellen?" she snapped. "We made our peace. You're just making it harder for everyone." Ellen straightened her spine. "I'm not doing this to hurt anyone," she said. "I'm doing it because we deserve the truth. Our children deserve better than lies." Martha muttered something under her breath and stalked off, leaving Ellen standing in the parking lot with the ache of loneliness twisting in her chest. Later that night, back at home, she sat by the window, looking out at the darkened street, thinking about Daniel, about all the years stolen from him, about the lives cut short and the parents left adrift. She thought about Mr. Allen, too. The injustice done to him, the cowardice of a community that had found it easier to blame than to ask hard questions. She would not stop now. No matter how many people whispered behind her back, no matter how lonely the fight became. Daniel's smile was etched into her memory, a beacon she would never abandon. She closed her eyes, rested her forehead against the cool glass, and whispered into the night, "I'm going to find the rest of your story, baby. I promise." Tomorrow, the real work would begin. It took less than 2 weeks for Detective Harmon and his team to act. After interviewing Claire Redford in Prescott, verifying her statements against the few fragments of evidence left from the original case, and uncovering inconsistencies in the school's archived records, the Charleston County Sheriff's Department formally reopened the Fairmont Elementary disappearance investigation. The news broke quietly at first, a small article buried on page 3 of the local newspaper, but the ripple effects were immediate. Families who had long buried their grief under layers of denial were forced to confront the possibility that what they had believed, or forced themselves to believe, for decades might not be true. A town that had comfortably let the mystery fade into tragic myth was now buzzing again with speculation, old fears rising to the surface like ghosts that refused to stay buried. Ellen watched it all unfold with a weary heart. She had no illusions that everyone would be grateful. Truth was a heavy thing. Not everyone wanted to carry it. Maggie stood by her side as the sheriff's department began to call in families of the missing one by one, informing them of the developments, collecting old photographs, testimony, anything that might help. Ellen and Maggie were invited to attend the first community meeting held at the town hall, a gathering intended to provide updates, but also to prepare the families for what could be a long and painful journey. The room was packed, the air heavy with tension. Faces Ellen hadn't seen in years were scattered among the rows, some lined with age and sadness, others hard with skepticism. Detective Harmon stood at the front, his presence steady, flanked by a team of cold case specialists flown in from Columbia and Washington. Ellen clutched Maggie's hand as Harmon began to speak, his voice low and respectful. "We have reason to believe," he said, "that the disappearance of the Fairmont 4th grade class was not a random event, but a coordinated abduction involving individuals within our own community." A gasp rippled through the crowd, followed by angry murmurs. "We understand this is painful and shocking, but we owe it to our children and to ourselves to pursue the truth wherever it leads." Questions erupted, frantic, emotional, accusatory. Some parents demanded why it had taken so long. Others wept openly. Some stormed out, unable or unwilling to reopen the wounds. Ellen remained seated, her grip on Maggie's hand unrelenting, her resolve solidifying with every passing second. Over the following weeks, the investigation unearthed a web of corruption that had quietly infected their town for years. The masked men Claire described were traced back to a small group of locals, tied to a now-defunct private security company. Men who had operated in the gray areas of the law, using their skills for darker purposes. Among them was a name, Ellen, recognized all too well. Thomas Keene, a parent whose son had graduated from Fairmont Elementary a few years before Daniel's class. Thomas had once chaired the school's booster club, organized community events, and been seen as a pillar of respectability. But hidden behind that facade was a man drowning in debt, desperate for money. Investigators uncovered evidence that suggested Keene and his associates had arranged the abduction, planning to sell the children into illegal adoption networks, and for the less fortunate, into even darker fates beyond U.S. borders. The revelation shattered what little innocence the town had clung to. Vigils were held in the square, candles flickering against the heavy night air, names of the missing whispered into the wind like prayers. Ellen attended each one, standing silently at the edge, clutching Daniel's photograph to her chest. She had fought for this, for truth, but the weight of it nearly broke her all over again. Some families thanked her with tear-streaked faces, embracing her fiercely. Others could not meet her eyes, unable to forgive her for tearing away the comfortable lies they had lived under for so long. One afternoon, Detective Harmon called Ellen into the station. She sat in a cramped interview room, her palms sweating against the cold metal table. Harmon entered with a folder thick with documents, his expression grim but determined. "We found something else," he said, laying out photographs, shipping records, and ledger books seized from Keene's abandoned storage unit. We believe some of the children were moved out of state immediately. Some were sent to Mexico, others possibly even further. Ellen's throat tightened painfully. And Daniel? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Harmon hesitated. We can't say for sure yet, but… He slid a small photograph toward her, grainy and faded, but unmistakable. A group of children huddled together in a dimly lit room, and there, smaller than she remembered, thinner but achingly familiar, was Daniel's face. Ellen's hand flew to her mouth. Tears blurred her vision. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times, feared it, hoped for it. To see proof he had lived, beyond that day, even if only for a while, shattered something inside her and healed something else. Harmon gave her time to compose herself before continuing. There's more. We've located a survivor. Ellen's heart slammed against her ribs. Her name is Teresa James. She was adopted illegally by a family in Texas who had no idea of her true origins. She's 29 now. She remembers Daniel. She remembers that he protected her, that he kept her calm when things were darkest. Ellen sobbed openly, not caring who saw. To know her son had been brave, that he had been kind even as a terrified child, was both a balm and a blade to her grieving heart. Days later, Ellen met Teresa in a small sunlit conference room. The young woman had Daniel's picture clutched, in her hand, tears glistening in her wide brown eyes. They talked for hours, trading memories, trying to stitch together the pieces of a shattered past. Teresa told her that Daniel had fallen ill after a few weeks in captivity, that he had refused food in protest when the captors mistreated the younger children. That one night, he simply didn't wake up. Ellen listened, heartbreaking anew but also swelling with pride. Her son had been brave. He had been good. Even at the end, he had fought. Charleston held a public memorial 6 months after the investigation. Officially closed, the truth had been exhumed, ugly and raw. But it had given the town a second chance to mourn properly, to heal honestly. A new monument was erected at Fairmont Elementary, a simple stone circle etched with the names of the missing, the found, the lost. Ellen stood before it on dedication day, the autumn air crisp and smelling faintly of wood smoke. She traced Daniel's name with her fingers, feeling the cold stone beneath her skin, and closed her eyes. Maggie stood beside her, a steady presence. Teresa had come too, holding Ellen's hand, no longer just a survivor, but a living link to the son she had lost and loved so fiercely. As the names were read aloud, a soft breeze stirred the golden leaves at their feet. Ellen lifted her face to the sky, a small smile breaking through her tears. Daniel's story had not ended in silence. It had ended in truth. It had ended with love. She whispered into the wind, I kept my promise, baby. I found your truth. And somehow, in that moment, the world felt a little lighter.